Hey guys, and welcome to Politics Snaps. Now you're about to watch, or listen to rather, an interview I did with David Wood, who's one of Britain's leading transhumanists. He's an author and the treasurer of the UK Transhumanist Party. So transhumanists are people who believe that we can and should modify human biology to improve human capabilities. So I think it's a really interesting interview. I really enjoyed speaking to him. So unfortunately you have to listen to it rather than watch it, because I did it on the phone. But I hope you find it interesting. If you do, please do comment below with what you think. Give it a like. If you can subscribe, I'll be very grateful. I wouldn't say no to subscriptions. So thank you very much, and I hope you find it interesting. I mean, I thought if it's okay with you, we'd start on more the practical side of things, and then we could go on to the theoretical stuff later. So by practical side, I mean what transhumanists are actually trying to do to influence contemporary politics in sort of Western and non-Western countries. So obviously, I was very interested. I saw that there's obviously a UK Transhumanist Party.
Yep.
And I think, or was it they had an independent who stood in Liverpool Wharton?
That's right.
I mean,
the reason he stood as an independent was simply because the process to register as a party would have taken longer than the amount of time left before the 2015 election.
Okay. I mean, is the tactic of that essentially awareness raising, or are you trying to sort of take enough votes that you can get people to vote your policies or anything like that?
It was an experiment, frankly.
Okay.
We didn't expect to win anything like enough votes to enter Parliament.
Yeah.
We thought, let's see what this is like.
Okay.
Let's find out what's involved. And so we found out what's involved in creating a party. I still maintain the paperwork for the party as the treasurer. So that means I have to submit annual reports on financial goings on with the party, which aren't enough to reach any of the limits which would normally raise questions about overseas involvement or other things that the Electoral Commission is understandably cautious of.
So you're registered with the Electoral Commission?
So it's the Electoral Commission that I think is the organisation that looks after parties, and if somebody wants to stand as an MP associated with a party, then that needs to be a party that's been approved by them. And there are various interesting small things, like we couldn't have a tick in our logo, or because a tick might be confused with the tick that people were meant to write in the box.
Yeah, I've heard there's some very strange things. It's like the Electoral Commission kind of formally registers parties. So I mean, is a Transhumanist Party at present a formally registered UK political party, or is it more of an aspiration?
No, there is a formally registered party. We pay whatever it is, £25 a year to maintain our standing.
Okay.
But we didn't put up any candidates in 2017, partly because it was happened quickly, partly because we thought, well, we're not going to gain anything more by doing this. But in principle, in some later stage, we could stand the candidates again. However, it's also clear to us that we have potential allies in virtually every political party.
Sure.
Decision as to whether somebody is in principle in favour of using technology to enhance human nature, enhance human capability, that is a separate one from where you stand on free markets versus state control, or also even on liberal morality versus conservative morality. So there's probably three different dimensions. There's the economics dimension, there's the social, there's the ethical or moral dimension, and then there's the bioconservative versus the techno-embracing dimension too.
I mean, what kind of interested me, obviously you decided to set your own party rather than work within the existing party framework. And from some of the stuff I saw in your book, obviously, I think you kind of think there's ways that the UK political system could be improved. Why did you decide to set up your own party rather than kind of work within the existing apparatus?
So we did both, actually.
Okay.
We set up a party, and we also created another organisation called Transpolitica, which was is a think tank, which indeed is willing to work within existing political parties. So I have talked to groups of Scottish nationalists and groups of Labour people formally, different places, and certainly I count myself as having friends in virtually every political party, even some with UKIP tendencies.
Okay. I mean, do you find that some political persuasions are much more positive towards you than others?
Not necessarily, no.
Oh.
It really does cut across, because transhumanism is more than one thing as well. But,
sure.
When we say technology is going to put a whole bunch of new questions on the table, so technology could enhance humans in the foreseeable future, and then when we go on to say it is good for technology to enhance humans, so not only could we do it, but we should do it, then that can have positive or negative feedback from people in all different political parties.
Okay. I mean, this may be completely wrong, but my kind of guess is you'd have problems with the more religious elements of the Tory right and perhaps the Tory right in general, and perhaps with some elements of the Labour left as well, on the basis that obviously it's a kind of threat to jobs, potentially in the long term, it's a threat to their social base. I mean, is there an extent to which transhumanism fits in best with a kind of, I hate the term centrist, but a kind of liberal democratic centrist kind of technocrat politician, or do you find literally it comes from everywhere?
So on the left, there's something called fully automated luxury communism.
Yes, that the Navarra media thing, isn't it?
Yes, so there are people who say, following John Maynard Keynes, John Maynard Keynes famously in an article in 1930 said that perhaps by about 100 years' time, that people would only need to work 15 hours a week.
Sure.
And the rest of the time could be dedicated to non-work activity. And so not everybody on the left is frightened by robot automation and the displacement from the workforce. They say it, there are big questions of how is it all going to be paid for, and you can go into arguments for basic income. And so there are people on the left who are saying, there are also people who are fearful, of course, people who think that the most important thing is to preserve the power of the workers and the power of the unions, and so they are quite more sceptical about that particular angle.
Sure. I guess this also plays into the bigger question of different governmental systems. So obviously at the moment, the most powerful country in the world, United States of America, is liberal democratic, although its president may not quite aspire to those values. I mean, I imagine one of the big questions of the next sort of century will be the technology that you're talking about in transhumanism, as in the technology which enables transhumanism. Do you think it's more going to be developed in liberal democratic countries, so like America, Western Europe, Japan, etc., or in authoritarian countries like China? Because I imagine that has pretty big political implications.
It's an enormous political implication, and I don't think people quite appreciate how much progress China is making. So there's a Sputnik moment, as it were, lurking about to break out. And some people notice it's already been pointed out by Andrew Ng, that's NG, his surname, Ng.
Okay.
Born in Britain, but he has worked in Google and also at Baidu, which is China's sort of equivalent of Google. And his observation sometime last year, and other people backed it up, as he says, the speed of progress in AI is faster in China than anywhere else in the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I believe, an objective fact that there are more articles published in China on deep learning than in any other country. And Western sort of say, oh, it's just derivative stuff, it's just copycat, it's quantity, but it's not quality. I'm very cautious about that. I remember when people said the same about Japan, and then when they said the same thing about Korea.
Okay.
I think there's certainly scenarios in which China will lead the way in at least some of the developments in AI, possibly some of the applications of genetic editing with CRISPR, whereas there are serious questions about what controls should be applied to gene editing technologies. But it seems that China is a little bit more open to doing things faster than other parts of the world. So it is by no means obvious that the best progress will come from the open and free markets.
Okay. I mean, presumably that. I mean, do you think that could give China a kind of competitive advantage in any kind of geostrategic competition with America or with the West more generally?
Well, Vladimir Putin has more or less said as much. Last year, he was talking in one of these open conferences. I can't remember exactly the words, but it's something like, "Whoever leads in AI will rule the world."
Yeah.
So, which has been widely quoted and tweeted, but it was just, I think, true. Already, the most wealthy companies in the world, as regards to public valuation, for the last few years, since 2016, they are no longer the Exxons and the oil companies. They are no longer the banks. The most highly valued companies are all now high-tech companies, or to be more precise, companies doing a huge amount of research in AI. So it's Apple, Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. And in fifth place, it used to be Facebook, but they, I believe, have been displaced by Tencent.
Okay.
Tencent are a Chinese company that do WeChat, amongst other things.
Okay. I mean, I'll do one final thing on the kind of the world political implications. I mean, presumably the whole kind of emergence of technology which transhumanists see as desirable will occur against a backdrop of what we assume will be the relative rise of China and possible decline of kind of the liberal democratic world in terms of relative power. So, I mean, China may well match or surpass the United States of America. And obviously that, I imagine, has quite significant ideological implications in the sense that from the end of the Cold War until very recently, it looked pretty clear that the liberal democratic model was the best model, kind of the end of history argument. There was no... there was no model. I mean, if you were kind of a reformer in an emerging nation and you looked at models to emulate, it was pretty clear you wanted to go for a liberal democratic capitalist one. But now with not China, but also various other authoritarian countries doing pretty well. I mean, the Philippines is sometimes mentioned as another example. Turkey, etc. With certain authoritarian models doing quite well as well, there's arguably a more intense ideological competition than at any time since the Cold War.
Yes.
And whatever happens with transhumanism will surely play into that to a huge degree, and possibly determine who wins. I don't know what you think about that.
So, I don't know which group will win. I don't know whether the Chinese method will be more successful. My instincts are if America or the EU or some other bloc really does embody the principles of open markets and open discussion of ideas, that should give a competitive advantage. So I do respect what can be done when there is support for creative destruction, as in Schumpeter's words.
Yeah.
I think that is how it's most likely that real progress will come. And it's by no means clear how China is going to manage the forces there.
Okay.
Maybe have an enlightened dictator, as it were, currently, Xi Jinping. But it's not obvious that they're going to manage to keep doing that, because we've had the checks and balances that open press and a loyal opposition, as it were, provide. They may get stuck in a rut. So I think it's still very much open as to what's going to happen.
Okay.
And in my book, I am advocating let's keep as much openness and transparency as possible. Let's ensure that this is not done behind closed doors by some powerful group, whether it's powerful corporations or powerful military or powerful politicians.
Sure. I mean, do you think that quite a lot of the concern about the technologies that transhumanists advocate comes from the fact that this may well be implemented in a period when non-liberal democratic countries become increasingly powerful? Obviously, China really becomes increasingly powerful. And obviously, I mean, the potential attached to this technology is just enormous. I mean, utterly revolutionary in every aspect of human existence. And if that's powered through by an authoritarian regime, or at least substantially powered through by an authoritarian regime, it could lead to very different outcomes to if it's powered through by kind of liberal democratic countries. And with that being the case, one of the biggest concerns about transhumanism or the technologies you advocate is that it's likely to be powered through by authoritarians, or there's a good chance it'll be powered through by authoritarian states, and that will lead to a very different outcome.
So, quite a lot of different things there. Let's see if I can...
So I was ranting a bit.
No, it's all right. So, there are concerns about misuse of technology, even within the liberal space. So, you can be afraid that this technology, surveillance technologies, manipulative technologies could be used by governments. Indeed, they probably are.
Sure.
But you can also be afraid that they're going to be misused by the powerful corporations, the Apples and the Googles and the Facebooks of the world. And so they are already manipulating us, and these companies pay very clever people lots of money to persuade the users to click on sites and spend more time on sites than probably in their better nature they would decide not to do.
Sure.
So we are being manipulated. So there is concern about surveillance capitalism and also about surveillance government. And they are legitimate, these claims, these fears. And we have to have that discussion. Any enthusiast for technology who doesn't want to have these discussions is doing a disservice. We have to be aware of the downsides of all these technology. And the mainstream transhumanist movement, as evidenced by the most famous document transhumanists have ever produced, which is the Transhumanist Declaration, it is full of issues saying, well, actually, there could be bad consequences of this technology. Therefore, we need to discuss it before we get there. Some of the scenarios could be exceedingly wonderful. Some of the scenarios could be exceedingly terrible. And it's by no means predetermined what will happen. It's not just that authoritarian governments might misuse them. It could be that well-intentioned but misguided corporations might do things with this. Like what? In a small case, things like Volkswagen with fiddling with the emissions, or other corporations are seeking profits for the oil industry, of course. But and therefore they have an inclination to downplay the negative externalities of the emissions of the greenhouse gases. Other corporations in the past, the big tobacco, was very motivated to muddy the connection between smoking and cancer. And for quite a while, they were quite successful at that. So there are risks, and we need an open discussion to ensure that we have the best. And I personally think that we're more likely to have a good outcome if we have an open and democratic process to politics. And that's what I argue in my book.
Okay. I mean, one slightly more kind of UK specific. I mean, what kind of policies would you like to see the UK government pursue to further the kind of technological developments which you think are desirable?
So there is something called nootropics. Nootropics are something called smart drugs. They are a casualty of a recent bill called the Psychoactive Substances Bill, which was brought in to try and, with a good motivation, is to prevent some people dying from legal highs.
Sure.
Or new kinds of drugs. So once upon a time, the drugs were very difficult to manufacture. There was only a set number of them, and you could certainly have a list and say, if you're on this list, it's bad. If you're on this list, it's good. But there are so many new drugs coming the whole time. And so, understandably, the government tried to say, well, we need to control this more. And the Psychoactive Substances Bill is just a bit too heavy-handed. It gets in the way of drugs, which probably would be harmless and positive for people to experiment with. Drugs to improve their memory. You're probably young enough to know people at university who took various drugs like Ritalin or...
Yeah, I am, yeah.
So, to boost your memory or creativity and so on. So I think there are some enhancements there, which we would certainly like to see.
Okay.
We also want more discussion of technological unemployment. We're not saying necessarily that universal basic income is bound to be the right answer. Although I know this is the Adam Smith Institute is quite in favour of it as well. They don't call it basic income; they call it negative income tax. Although they have also said that if necessary, they would even adopt the terminology of basic income tax, basic income, if it was felt appropriate. So they quote people like Friedman and Hayek favourably in terms of distributing cash to people who don't have it for whatever reasons.
Sure.
So we want that discussion to move onwards too. And the robots are coming for a long time, and they're not here yet. So let's push it off to the next election cycle, or the next election cycle after that. And my argument is it's actually going to change slowly and then fast. It's as in the famous line from one of Elvis Hemingway's works. Somebody asked a colleague, "How did you become bankrupt?" And he says, "Slowly and then quickly."
Yeah.
That's how exponential change comes through. We want people to be aware of that exponential. So there's two areas off the top of my head.
So I almost get the impression that at the moment you're more trying to raise awareness and discussion around certain subjects than actually push for kind of radical policy changes to enable your agenda to happen. Do you think that's a fair description?
Yes. Well, I have come to the views, personally, through writing my book, I've come to the view that I'm much more in favour of changing the voting system to something more like a PR system, where a bit like we have for the European elections, where there are large constituencies and more than one MP per these large constituencies, so that minority viewpoints are more fairly represented, and this will allow change in the party structure more quickly than has taken place historically.
Okay.
So that's one view which all minor parties tend to express that view. I come to see it as more urgent and more important.
Yeah. I mean, presumably that's...
The thing I need to just say one more thing.
No, please do.
Policy we'd like, which is support for rejuvenation technologies. That is, technologies which will undo the damage of aging and therefore put people back in a healthier and more youthful state.
Sure.
And there is a principle called the longevity dividend that various economists and demographers talked about, a bit like the peace dividend. So the longevity dividend is if we could actually delay the onset of aging, even by a few years. 7 years is one figure that's discussed. It would have a tremendous positive impact on the national economy. One, because people are staying healthy and therefore contributing to the economy, either as workers or as consumers more. And secondly, they aren't draining healthcare for chronic diseases. At least that will be delayed until longer. So we want more support for public and private funding into the potential root cause of many of these diseases, which we see as aging. And we can talk more about that as well. So in terms of the big policies that we often highlight, it's these three. There's the nootropics, more freedom to experiment with enhancing ourselves, with cognitive enhancing drugs, attention to the basic income and technological unemployment, and then this third one, which is support for research into longevity. And again, there's a regulatory angle there too. We want it to be easy to try new drugs and new treatments, and we're aware that many new drugs and new treatments go through a very long and expensive process currently, and we are keen to work with other people to streamline the system, especially when people voluntarily say they want to take treatments, even though they're aware of having gone through their full three-phase approval mechanisms.
Okay. I mean, I guess one of the most controversial aspects of kind of transhumanism is that certainly initially we're probably going to talk about a relatively small number of people or minority, as and obviously the bounds of probability these technologies will be very expensive. It's going to take... I mean, that being the case, I mean, I know there's a kind of division between transhumanism and technoprogressives about whether that's the most effective allocation of resources or whether we should concentrate on kind of more immediate things. And I believe your argument is basically to do both. I mean, my biggest question about the disparity that it will create, I mean, presumably it could potentially create a significant disparity in intellect or bigger disparity than already exists.
Yes.
And I mean, our democratic system, I suppose you'd say, but we have a kind of form of elitist democracy. That it gives everyone a vote, but at the same time we've got quite complex structures in place which effectively prioritise people with higher intellect to some extent. That's kind of what the party system does, kind of what the media does. I mean, if you do you think our democracy is elastic enough that you could have even wider or potentially much wider disparities in intellect and still have a one vote, one person system, and that be a viable governing system?
So I'm very much in favour of making sure these therapies are available to everybody at a low price.
Sure.
I know that they're likely to start off being quite expensive, but I'm in favour for doing everything to push this out more quickly, and it will have social benefit. It will benefit society greatly to do that.
Okay.
I recognise that technology is actually increasing inequality in various ways, and you're quite right to point to, I mean, there is already a kind of feedback cycle, whereas wealthy people can afford to have their children go to better schools and get private tutors and so on, so they are more likely to get into various universities, and they have connections with other people who help them in their careers. So there is a bit of a self-perpetuation there. There is still some social mobility, thank goodness.
Yeah.
I came from a farming village, managed to get into Cambridge. First person from my school, I went straight from there to Cambridge. So there is some social mobility, but not enough. And there is evidence, at least in some parts of the world, that social mobility is reducing rather than increasing. And one of the causes may be the technology when it takes all phenomenon.
Yeah.
People who are lucky enough or fortunate enough to have the right skills to get jobs in these incredibly powerful, successful companies will do very well, thank you. And those who previously were doing all right are now working in companies for which there are lower wages. So they may still have jobs, but they're not particularly great jobs. They're part of the precariat. So this tendency is there. And it would be really uncomfortable for society if this is true. So what is Yuval Harari? I don't know if you've come across the Israeli historian Yuval Harari. His phrase is that if we're not careful, you end up sometime this century with a division between the near gods and the mainly useless.
Yeah.
That there'll be a few people who are fortunate enough to do very well, and they'll be living much better than most of the Greek gods could even have imagined if such Greek gods had existed. So with such quality of life, whereas most other people will have nothing to do.
Yeah.
Because anything they might have thought of doing could be done better by automation. And that is a scenario that Yuval Harari paints in his book Homo Deus.
A Brief History of Tomorrow.
Yeah, so there are two books.
Yeah, no, I've read them both. I do. I mean, that's very interesting. I mean, I guess I'm kind of linking on to that. I mean, obviously, there will come a time where a small section of humanity will probably benefit this far more than others. And say, for example, you're one of the lucky ones that gets hugely enhanced intellect, hugely enhanced abilities. Are you really still going to be prepared to share power with what to you are now morons? I mean, would it not be like us? Would it not be equivalent to kind of like us letting chickens vote or something? As in, because I mean, your intellect is so much greater than the rest of what you came from, the rest of humanity. There's such a big discrepancy. Would you not be reluctant to share? And if you were prepared to share, would that not give a competitive advantage to countries that were run along lines that weren't prepared to share? I.e., so if there's one country which has maintains a current democratic system, one person, one vote, and there's another country which gives, say, people with hyper intelligence more votes, will that country not be run along more efficient lines, and then would kind of triumph almost along a kind of Darwinian lines?
So if it came to that circumstance, then I can see there would be lots of pressure to do it, as you say, which is why I'm seeking hard to ensure that there isn't this huge gulf between the near gods and the users. I'm seeking to ensure that no one is left behind.
Okay.
That people who wish to take advantage of this can do so. It's not required. There will still be scope for various types of Amish who, if they wish, do not to adopt various technologies, but I think they will see the benefits of social. It will be like somebody deciding they don't want to learn to read and write.
Yeah.
At a time, many people didn't read and write, and that was okay because most jobs didn't need reading and writing until they suddenly had a diminished cultural life as a result. But nowadays, there's very strong pressures on everybody to be literate, and I think in the future there'll be strong reasons people can see why it's good for them to enhance themselves, to be smarter, to be more in control of their cognitive biases, and other aspects of human nature which are currently destructive and dangerous. So more people will say, yeah, actually, I want part of this too. I just have to be sure that it's driven down in price.
Sure.
And made available. This is the great project. So one of the answers to how are people going to live when robots are doing all the jobs is well, we make the basics of living cheaper. Yes, there has to be some distribution of some money, so that people have something to buy various things with, but the cost should come down.
Yeah.
We should be measuring our success in society not by how much inflation, how much GDP is going up, but how much the cost of basic things is going down. And in the same way, we should be driving the cost and the barriers to enhancement down as well, and that will be the mark of a successful society.
It almost seems to me that some of the biggest concerns about kind of the technology that transhumanists advocate are that it comes around in an uncontrolled or semi-controlled manner. So, for example, having a disparity between some people who are hyper-intelligent and some people aren't, or what was the phrase you said, demigods and...
gods and mainly useless.
And mainly useless, exactly. I mean, do you think there's a case for a strong regulatory framework to control and manage the transhumanist revolution, which looks inevitable, in order to kind of minimise the social effects and then possibly minimise the resulting reaction? I mean, this may be my instinctual small c conservatism, but when you're dealing with something so revolutionary, my instinct is to take it in small steps, just because essentially the future of the human race is at stake, and if you cock up, you've only got the one chance. So is there not a case of taking everything very slowly with a very strong regulatory framework to try and minimise these risks?
So I am in favour of there being a powerful regulatory framework. I don't want it to be too heavy-handed. I don't want it to try and cover everything. So it's lean rather than extensive. And exactly what it covers needs to be a matter of a serious and ongoing debate, because there are things which can easily be over-regulated and get in the way of progress and genuine innovation or genuine creativity. So we have to be careful what we regulate, but there are some things that do need regulation. So, for example, if a scientist wants to publish information today on how to make the smallpox virus more deadly and how to spread more quickly, or how that is strongly discouraged, and likewise, distribution of nuclear weapons technology is carefully controlled. And some of the transhumanist technologies likely fall into the same category. And it's probably too early to regulate yet, but we need to have strong discussions about what the best practices are, and maybe we'll say actually some of these things are so important that we do need regulations.
Yeah.
And it probably has to be done on the worldwide level too to be successful, which is a complication, because if we in Britain and Europe were to say, all right, we're not going to do this kind of experimentation, but China and Russia went ahead and did it, then people in Britain and Europe say, hang on, we're not going to have our hands tied behind our back in this unfair competition.
Yeah.
So, and how do we know that people aren't cheating? Well, that's a good question. But people sort of have nuclear weapons inspections systems, and something similar could be worked out and put in place. So it's early days, but it needs to accelerate, because we don't know how long it's going to take us to agree what such framework should be.
Okay. I mean, almost to some extent, the current kind of global political setup, i.e. of competing nation states, makes it very hard to imagine that transhumanist technology will be effectively regulated at all. But the advantages to countries of pushing heavily on with transhumanist technology in terms of their personal powers. I mean, China, again, is one we keep coming back to, makes me think that the chances of them agreeing to a kind of strong overarching regulatory framework is quite low, but that I may be being pessimistic.
So I would hope that if there is, if we figure out actually it would be better for certain things to be regulated,
sure,
then we'd be able to have an argument and take that to various leaders. And Chinese leadership, whatever else they are sympathetic to engineering ideas. They're not all lawyers, or as many politicians in the Western world are either lawyers or even just professional politicians.
Yeah.
But in China, there's more of a background of engineering, and so there is a scope to take various arguments to them and say, this is why we think there needs to be regulation on such and such a thing, and that argument has to stand up in reason and rationality.
Okay. I mean, I guess it's a slightly different question, but how worried are you by the potential reaction to this technology? I mean, obviously, as you keep saying, this technology would be utterly revolutionary. It would kind of, it would almost be a kind of year zero for human civilization. It'd be kind of before and after the technological. Yeah. I mean, how kind of concerned are you by the potential reaction to it, which I imagine could be very aggressive and possibly revolutionary in its own right?
Yeah, there is a phrase called future shock. People are often stunned by it and say, oh, yuck, this is so horrible. It's a bit like the reaction, you're probably too young to remember, but there was a reaction against the idea of test tube babies for a while.
Yeah.
That this would be, first of all, there were the theological arguments against it. Such babies wouldn't have souls. And then there was the more secular versions of it. Well, if you discovered you'd been born in a test tube, you would feel a lack of love from your parents, and you would feel alienated. You would feel yourself to be a monster. And also at that time, in the 1970s, many MPs did not speak up in favour of test tube baby research because there was a big concern at that time that the world was becoming overpopulated. And so allowing more people to become parents and bring even more children into the world wasn't a particularly strong political claim. And then Louise Brown was born, and people looked at her and said, you know, she seems to have a soul as much as anybody else has a soul, and her parents were delighted, and then people said, oh, of course we want this.
Yeah.
But that was an easy case. Other cases may be harder. And so when I talk to people about, well, you know, there's a possibility that we could have indefinite youthfulness, there is sometimes some very angry and hostile reactions.
Okay. I can't imagine why for that one. that strikes as one of the simple ones. I mean, things like augmenting human intelligence seems to me just to be something which would be so utterly transformative to our society that I imagine that some people on a whole range of grounds would be extremely uncomfortable with it. And that in the next, say, 30, 40 years, it could become a extremely hot political issue.
Well, I think this could become a hot political issue much quicker than that.
Okay.
It will be clear sooner that this stuff is happening earlier because of what's possible.
Okay.
We can't be sure because we don't know how long it's going to take to solve various research issues and various research problems, but you're talking about 30 or 40 years in the future. I would say in the next couple of decades, it's going to become more and more a mainstream political topic.
Okay.
But on your point, yes, some people will react against it, and they'll have various arguments against it. They'll say if we just magnify intelligence, then we may end up having some very nasty, very clever people. After all, some of the cleverest people in the world are pretty nice.
Yeah.
Some of them are in the world of politics, some of them are in different worlds too. You can use your cleverness to do all kinds of terrible things. You can justify it. So there may be worries about distorting the balance of human capabilities, which is why transhumanists will say, well, actually, it's more than just making people cleverer. You have to undo some of the inherited bad aspects of human nature, aspects which made sense in our prehistory, where we were more focused on short-term issues. It was appropriate to be fearful in the short term, thinking about the long term didn't have much evolutionary advantage.
Yeah.
Being afraid of people who look different was probably a healthy evolutionary advantage as well.
Yeah.
So you have inherited these things, just like we've got a sweet tooth. You know, in ancient times it made good sense to eat as much sugar as you could get a hold of, probably.
Yeah.
And nowadays we need to fight against that inherited tendency. So in the same way, transhumanists will say, and we have to address other aspects of the human mind beyond just the rationality of it.
I mean, I guess the big issue then you're going to run into is probably organised religion, do you think? As in, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, clearly we evolved as a species in very different circumstances to conditions we live in now. I mean, our technology has massively outpaced evolution, and I think that's created a lot of the kind of current problems in the world are as a result of that. But I mean, the religious perspective from both. I mean, obviously, the two religions that really matter, Christianity and Islam, is that God created humanity as a perfect entity, sort of a copy of himself. Well, not necessarily a copy of himself, but a copy of elements of himself, and that tankering with that would be, attacking God's work essentially. I mean, and obviously, at this present time, the majority of the world's population are either Christian or Muslim. So would that create a very dangerous block, do you think?
So there are definitely potential issues there, but there is a great diversity even within Christianity. There's a great diversity within Islam as well. Just as many Christians were able to come to terms with Darwin, some of them rejected it, and some of them said, of course, the book of Genesis needs to be interpreted metaphorically rather than literally.
Yeah.
That God may have created humanity through the process of evolution, and so on. Or in some other sense, people can interpret it. So many religious people throughout history have been in favour of medicine. Many religious people throughout history have been in favour of helping people to live longer. And there are also some Christian groups who declare themselves to be Christian transhumanists. So there is a Christian Transhumanist Association. There's quite an active Mormon Transhumanist Association. And I'm not an expert in Mormonism, but I think their theology is a little bit more favourable to the idea that man can become God.
Okay, it's interesting.
So Islam is, because you didn't have a Reformation in Islam the same way as the Reformation in Christianity.
Sure.
It's not quite so clear what people think, but I do believe there will be groups within Islam who are quite favourable to one transhumanism. And then other people will give up their religion and become transhumanists because they say, well, the reason I was religious was because I wanted various things to happen, and I can see now that transhumanism is a better way to make these things happen.
Yeah.
It's more likely that we're going to have a longer life, if not immortality, maybe even some kind of resurrection in the future, which some technology might enable, whether it's cryonics or whether some more imaginative thing, whether it's quantum archaeology or space-time re-engineering, which the future descendants might be able to do. So they may give up a particular credo from their current religion and move into transhumanism.
Okay.
So I'm not fearful of all these people by any means.
And one final kind of political question, and then I'll get on to the good stuff, the good stuff this could do. I mean, would this not to some extent, is there a danger in terms of political extremism? So in the sense that, obviously at the moment, certain political ideologies basically aren't viable, are barely viable, and when they're tried in the real world, they tend to collapse in themselves. So a good example would be the Islamic State. I mean, they've got a basically crap ideology, and when they try and impose it, it tends to fall in of itself, and the same kind of applies to communism and fascism and so on. But once you combine these ideologies with incredibly advanced technological capabilities, which go beyond normal human capabilities, will these ideologies not cease to be completely unviable? And is there a risk, therefore, that you essentially a whole range of political ideologies and viewpoints which at the moment can't really be realised in real life, like very extreme forms of fascism and that sort of thing, could potentially, with more advanced technologies, become viable systems for governing humans?
Yes, and Islamic State thrived more than people expected, in part because it used some technology.
Yeah.
There was great advantages. The social media experts, so their use of YouTube. They had, I believe, a glossy magazine as well, which had high production values.
Yeah.
Which helped for a while to attract people to their cause. And maybe in the future, there will be communes, or people talk about seasteading communities, or micronations. So a micronation is when you just take over a piece of land and say, well, this is your own nation, and you're going to set up your own rules there. And there are libertarian groups who talking about, taxation will be entirely voluntary, and they may make some progress with it. And the seasteading is when you do that in a boat in the sea rather than on a piece of land.
Okay.
Including Patrick Freeman, who is, I think, the grandson of Friedman, the economist.
Oh, right, okay. I mean, turning to kind of more positive things, obviously there's just a tremendous amount of potential in just about every area associated with this technology. I mean, are there particular things that I suppose, well, not ending death, but greatly enhancing human life is the one people usually point to. Are there any things you're particularly excited about, or?
So I'm interested in something called collaboration technology to help people to collaborate better than before. And so we can look at wikis as one example of that. Wikis have helped people to collaborate more powerfully than before, and Wikipedia is one of the marvels of the modern world in terms of the information that's in there. So I think similar technologies should be able to help to bring about a wisdom of the crowds rather than the madness and the chaos of the crowds. It's something that will allow a fair and open discussion in which the best insights of the group are elevated rather than just the loudest voices or the opinions of the most powerful press barons or other opinion dominators. So things like wiki technologies, but others as well, under the general banner of collab tech, I think have a great potential to improve the collective intelligence. And in fact, the CEO of Nesta, Jeff Mulgan, has recently produced a book on roughly similar lines. I forget what it's called, but it's about collective intelligence. So
okay.
He has a background working in Number 10 and various other places as well. So that was a similar spirit there. That the most important technology to get right is the technology that allows us to be more collectively intelligent, in which we're able to use the insights from AI, but also the insights from multiple different kinds of human perspectives. So that excites me.
Okay. I mean, a slight curveball. I was reading in an argument literally just before I did this, essentially the argument along the lines of, obviously, because human technology has advanced so far beyond our kind of almost our emotional level, and we have such a structured power that essentially unmodified, i.e. in the form that evolution made us, will almost inevitably destroy ourselves at some point. In the same way, like the monkey in a hand grenade analogy, you give a monkey a hand grenade, it's only a matter of time before it pulls the pin. This is argument made by transhumanists, and therefore that if we don't have the technology that transhumanists recommend and the changes to, I guess, basic human biology, which will be associated with that, human extinction is almost inevitable. I was wondering what you thought about that.
Well, I think there are real risks to human extinction or other existential risks, which are made worse by more powerful technology being used by standard or unmodified humans.
Sure.
There is a slightly humorous phrase called Moore's Law of Mad Scientists, which states that every 18 months the IQ necessary for a mad scientist to have to be able to destroy the world comes down by 1 or 2 points.
Okay.
It's an exact law, but it refers to the original Moore's Law from Gordon Moore, the co-founder of Intel, who basically pointed out in 1965, and it's still more or less true, that every year or two, you can cut the difference, every 18 months, the number of transistors you can put on an integrated circuit doubles. And so every 18 months, the processing power of integrated circuits doubles at the same cost. If you build that up over a period of time, it just gets larger and larger and larger. So in 10 years, it's 100 times more powerful.
Okay.
So that's the positive side. But Moore's Law of Mad Scientists, which is due to somebody called Eliezer Yudkowsky, points out that you could have an increasingly stupid bunch of people, or who can take a hold of some of this technology and through their misunderstanding could destroy the world, or maybe even deliberately they could destroy the world.
Yeah.
The next version of IS or the next version of the America who believe in the second coming of Christ is just around the corner, and Donald Trump is one of the prophesied angels from the Book of Revelations, or whatever it is they seem to think. They may want to hurry things along a bit by stirring things up as they see it.
Okay.
So that is a real concern. And when I look ahead as to what I think the world might be in 2050, I don't think it's going to be roughly the same as today, just a little bit faster or whatever. I see at least a 1 in 3 possibility the world will be much, much worse than today.
Okay.
In dark age, whether we'll be destroyed altogether, or whether it'll be like the decline of Rome and the plunge into the age of barbarians, with the loss of all that entailed, or worse. So I think there's a 1 in 3 chance we'll have something like that, and there's a nearly 2 in 3 chance that will be an incredibly better situation by the middle of the century, with people who are much smarter but also much kinder, people who are much healthier and longer lived, people who reach much higher levels of consciousness on a much more regular basis. So we can call that crudely paradise on earth.
Yeah.
And so I don't see much probability of staying roughly in the middle, keeping calm and muddling along. That was good advice for lots of time in history. But the forces that are being unleashed by these new technologies, nanotech, quantum computing, robotics, biotechnology, neurotechnology, and of course AI and deep learning, they're so huge that they're not going to just stay simple and stay inert. They're going to react in very powerful ways, and we have to guide that reaction for a positive outcome rather than a negative one. And if our politicians are still focusing on the problems of yesterday, or even the problems of this year, and they're not thinking enough about these longer term issues, then